And good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Board of Selectmen meeting for January 18th. All selectmen are present, save Ms. Faniff. Our first order of business is the audit report for FY16. Mr. Frere, welcome.
Nice to be back.
Good to have you.
Thanks. I see a few new faces, so that's good because I feel like I'm repeating the same story every year to the same people, so it's nice.
It's been a good story, so I
It's
don't
always
mind it being
It's
repeated.
been a good story, and I guess there hasn't been a lot of unusual stuff going on, so it's been pretty status quo the last few years.
Good.
There should be, if not in the handouts behind you, there's some charts to look at, and we'll go through those. That kind of summarizes the important numbers that are in the audit report. There's a lot of numbers on some of these charts, so it's sort of, I'm going to talk more from the conceptual side of what the numbers, why I have them up there and what they mean. So the general fund is obviously the central fund, the biggest fund of the town. And what I like to do is show a 5-year history of how the revenues and expenses have changed, because the bond people look at that. And, you know, I would say a number between 2 and 5% is something that they tend to look for. So you want something that isn't too low, where you have the bond rating agencies thinking the town can't grow or isn't growing or isn't going to be able to fund their expenses over time. If it's too high, they don't think it's sustainable. So, although there are some ups and downs in some of these years and some higher jumps than others, the 2.7% average jump in revenue and the 2.3% average jump in expenditures is, kind of where you want to be. I wouldn't want to see something around 1%. Once you start getting over 5, it's a little, it's aggressive. So that's a good set of numbers. The next slide shows the use of the town's reserves, which is typically free cash, and the results of your budget. So this shows that you've, partly because I think you don't have as much free cash, but you've brought down the amount that you're using each year for the budget, and you're targeting more capital items, which is good, rather than the operating side of the budget. So that's in the first column. The second column shows the net budgetary variance. So that shows the amount of the revenues that were over budget and the expenses that were under budget. And you see most years you're able to replenish. You use $2 million, like back in 13, you plan on using $2 million, but your budgetary variance was 1.9, so you put most of that back. So that's why each year you're just regenerating the free cash. The last two columns, I like to show the budget to actual. And again, in terms of what the bond rating agencies see, you don't want to be too much below 1% because they think your budgets are too tight. On the other hand, if you're up around the 4 or 5%, you wonder, well, the budget's not as realistic as they could be. So once again, your expense side is tight. I mean, you look at those numbers for 5 years, you've never been more than 1.6%, and you've been as low as 1 year 0.4%. So your expense side is tight. You're doing well in your revenue side, but on average, if you add, for example, for 17, the two numbers, you're at about 1.5%. So that's not, it's low, but it's not a bad place to be. And as I go through these, if anybody, jump in if you have any questions, if I go too fast. So when the bond rating agencies look at the reserves, they typically think of free cash and stabilization. And we've talked about this every year, that your numbers are low. Typically, the bond people like to see 8 to 12%. There was a time when you were way over that, and I think this was many years ago, as part of a reaction to that, the stabilization fund was drawn down. And so now, I would say for the towns that I audit, you're on the lower side of that. It's hard when you have a lot of needs, and I know the budgets are tight. But I would say that, building up the stabilization fund when it's possible would not be a bad objective. 3.6% of your budget is pretty low for the reserve amount. But that's been by design. It's not because you had to go this way. It was decided.
What did you say a good target was there?
They typically use 8 to 12. I have towns that aren't at the 8%, they're below that, but I have other towns that are closer to the 12. last time around, I don't remember what year did we meet with the bond, with Moody's or Standard & Poor's?
2 years ago.
So, it wasn't as big of an issue as I thought it was going to be when we met with them, but they definitely mentioned.
Yeah, I think we kind of made the argument that we had unused levy capacity of over $2 million, and so in order to try to get our AAA, because I think this was our one Achilles heel, we made an argument, and they agreed, that if you take our unused levy capacity along with our stabilization fund, we actually have this amount of money. So that's, that kind of worked at
Yeah,
that
no,
point.
I remember that now. Next slide, and again, we talk about these every year. So the two big issues, in government accounting right now tend to be this OPEB stuff, which is your retiree health insurance benefits, and pension. And there's been a lot of focus on it. GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board that regulates what we do and how you have to present numbers in your financial statements, have been issuing lots of material and changes to how we have to show this. There's actually a new statement coming out next year on OPEB. But they're big numbers. And so what the town did back in 14, which is great, is it established an OPEB trust fund. And you're trying to fund that each year. The first year it was more modest, but since then you've been, I think, putting in, was it 300 the last couple of years?
250.
250, sorry. And that's augmented by, because it's invested, you're allowed, unlike a lot of town funds, you can actually invest this in market instruments. There are going to be years where you're going to do better than others, and you had a good year this past year, obviously, because that jumped by over 318,000. So the idea, and this is one of those things that Moody's and S&P hit on, is, are you funding it? Are you being consistent? So you're doing the right things. You've moved from a no funding policy to a funding policy, where you've been able to put that 250 in the budget every year. The pension liability, I don't know if it's the right way to say it, but it's sort of out of your control because it's being funded through your assessments with the regional retirement system. And your retirement system, I think, is on a plan to fully fund by 2030s, 2030s. So absent any changes, absent any real difficulty in the economy, because it's happened before where the state stretched it out a few more years, but this hopefully will be fully funded by 2030 something. And that, as I said, that's built into your annual assessment, so you don't have to worry about that. The OPEB stuff, because you're not in any kind of regional plan, I don't think any regional plans exist actually for OPEB. You have your own plan. Every town has their own plan. So you have to make that decision to fund it yourself. And, you're already at $1 million. That's great. And hopefully you can continue to keep that money, protect that money in the budget. Those are probably next to bonds, they're the two biggest liabilities. Outstanding debt, which is another large number in the financial statements. The thing that we've been saying about this every year is that you've had the luxury of not, I know something's coming up this year or next year, but you've had the luxury of not needing to do a lot of borrowing. So you can see that the debt has gone down just in those 5 years that are shown, from 22 million to 13 million. And the other thing to note on the debt is of that 13.5, the general government, which is the non-water, which water comes from its own rates, is 9.6 million. And almost 6 million of that is due from the state. You'll get the money back from the MSBA, the school building, because it's school building debt. So really, your net non-water debt that's not going to be, subsidized by the state is only 3.6 million. For a town with a budget this size, that's low, which is good. And, I've been here long enough to know that, you spent a lot of money in the 90s on some of the school projects. And a lot of that was, over time reimbursed as you've paid the debt by the state. So, that's a good number. Again, all these things, when you go for your next rating this year, these are all positives. Capital assets. So capital assets are buildings, infrastructure, roads, equipment, everything that sort of counts as, in the private sector, it's called, tends to be fixed assets. I like to show this because it's important to be able to show that you're reinvesting and you're not deferring maintenance. And so without any major projects, without any large projects, the fact that your gross capital assets went up by 1.9% is good. That means that the ongoing replacement of roads and equipment, vehicles, that sort of thing, and upkeep of buildings is being, that's happening. I like to show the net. The net means your gross net of depreciation, and you really like to be trying to keep up with depreciation over time. Again, it's only gone down, the net number's only gone down by 0.6% in a period where you've had really no major projects. That's good, so that's a good number. These are gonna look a lot better next year or the year after when you add the new stuff that's going on. Oh, and that's it. So that's a very quick run-through. The only other thing to mention is that, you know, I would need to report to you if we had any major issues, either in the internal control area or the legal compliance area, and we have had none. We haven't had any for a number of years. So all in all, the audit went well.
Any questions for Mr. Frere? None? None? Mr. Schifrin? No? No?
None for me.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Excellent work.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
sir.
Mr. Chairman, before we conclude and before Bill leaves, I just want to thank Bill again for another good year, but I also want to acknowledge all of the town departments for the work that they do and making sure that we keep good records, and also want to acknowledge the finance team, Brian Ballantyne, Finance Director, Heidi Krieger, who is here this evening, Town Accountant, and obviously Mr. Sabelli in the Assessor's Office. We have a great finance team. And so it's really, excuse me, nice to see, you know, when we get these, you know, we get the reports and we have the auditor, you know, an independent auditor standing up in front of you and telling you that we're in good shape and we're doing good things. So I appreciate that.
Well said. Thank you.
All right, thanks, yep.
All right, next we're going to hear from the Fayetteville Hall Disposition Committee. Their final report. Please join us.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it? No, it's named RDR. It's called RDR.
Want to use my copy?
Let's see if we can. This one has better picture. No.
It's gonna be over here,
Okay.
right in there. It's not there, too. That's your operating system.
Okay. Dang.
It's not on,
All right.
right, let's try this one. Try mine. Of course.
We won't be long.
Quite all right.
We hope.
Take your time.
Oh, thank goodness I printed hard copies with the.
Yeah, and we've, I'm confident we've all gone through what's in the packet, which is an
Yeah.
outstanding work product, so, you know, it'd be great if the public could see it, but if not, we'll,
And you can.
hey, there you go.
All right. Oh, this one's okay.
You could use my copy.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Missing
Mr.
some
Parra.
pictures. Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome.
Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Okay. And how do I advance on this machine? All right. All right.
All right.
Okay, well, good. Hello, my name's Rebecca Deansrow, Chair of the Fayetteville Hall Disposition Committee and member of the Southborough Historical Commission. We have 5 other members of the committee here this evening.
If you could just recognize them, would be great.
Yes.
Just because I know a lot of work goes into all this, and everyone's a volunteer.
Yeah, that's my last slide.
Well, I saw that, but
Kristen LeBeau.
yes, welcome.
Vice Chair Kyle DeCubulus was our clerk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, John
Yep.
Parent as ex officio, and I believe Mark Purple was ex officio as well.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome. So our committee understood our objectives to be that we would review the draft RFP for the disposition of 40 and 42 Central Street within the parameters of the April 2017 town meeting vote. We considered and discussed recommendations for the modifications to the draft with a particular focus on concerns of the represented commissions. And finally, we produced a short written report summarizing those suggestions. The committee identified 5 areas that should receive special consideration when evaluating proposals, and the group agreed that these areas should be evenly weighted in the selection process. I will touch on them quickly, then go back to a couple with more detail. Historic. The Southborough Historic Commission strongly encourages preservation of the exterior of this architecturally and historically significant building, and the committee supports this goal. Parking for recreation. The committee feels the location of Fayetteville Hall and proximity to Fayetteville Memorial Field should be emphasized in the RFP, and the goal of retaining the parking currently available at the vacant lot. Septic. Buyers should be aware that the new septic system is required and be prepared to handle anything this involves. Affordable housing. Buyers should be encouraged to review any CPC affordable housing trust funds that might be available. Members of the committee felt that possible conversion to affordable housing could be a good solution for the town that would easily work with historical and recreation priorities. Permitting. Wording should be clear that all required permits for intended use are the responsibility of the purchaser, and as with the septic, buyers should be prepared to handle this process. So now my notes don't match the presentation. Well, anyway, so as I mentioned, the hall was constructed in 1911 and is a significant example of colonial revival. The hall is part of a collection of buildings that make Fayetteville Village eligible as a National Historic District. The hall is the heart and focal point of the village with a long history of civic use. Preservation of the exterior features and footprint would continue to enhance the unique charm of Southborough. And on the printout of the other PowerPoint presentation that we had hoped to share, there are some historic pictures. One from 100 years ago, right around the flu outbreak of 1917 and 1918, where tents were set up and Fayetteville Hall served as a makeshift hospital.
Rebecca, if I may, I'll interject just quickly. So that's one of the neatest pictures, and I think there's so much history at Fayetteville Hall. And you go around to other national parks and you see, homes that were maintained or buildings that were maintained, and a write-up about it outside of the building. I know this is maybe outside this presentation's purview, but has that ever been discussed about having an amazing picture like that preserved and out in front of that building? And has anyone tackled that?
If the
with
new
the story?
purchaser agrees
Yeah.
to restore the exterior, then I'm sure we would be happy to do that.
That would, anyway, just thought I'd put that on
Yeah.
anyone's radar that would be interested in, because that is, an amazing story, what happened there. And it'd be neat to see it preserved in some ways.
Right, and it's sort of timely. Now we are facing
Yeah.
rather nasty.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No problem. So in the historic pictures, you'll see, which you can't see on this, columns, or maybe you can, columns that were in place on either side of the door, And there were some shutters on the side of the building, and ideally, from a historic perspective, we would like to see the facade footprint maintained, and even better, to some of those features put back on. So another major concern that we talked about a lot was parking for recreation. And it's also a good excuse to show a picture of my daughter from a few years ago, sliding into home.
She's safe?
I don't know, there's a lot of sliding in T-ball. That was kind of a...
Those spikes are up there, though.
Yeah.
See,
So, as most residents know, Fayetteville Memorial Park enjoys frequent use for T-ball games as open space, as a playground, and there's a newly built playground that will be opening in spring of this year. And parking is always at a premium. You can see in that picture there's some parking along the side of the road, and probably most of you have been through this, where you try to unload your kids and take them to the game or whatever without getting into the traffic. And there's also a small lot at 40 Central Street that is used regularly for overflow parking. The committee would ideally like to see buyers address this concern and be favored in a proposal. We would advise that the RFP language provide preference to potential buyers who either agree to leave a portion of the land in Lot 40 out of the sale for Southborough to retain as parking, or allow public parking in a lot on the property, noting that the park is only open from dawn to dusk and nighttime parking is not required. Some sort of potential use that would allow shared parking would be very heavily favored. Gosh, and that's just about it. As I said, these are our members of our committee, and the process was we met 4 times, we toured the property, and we spoke via conference call with Paul Pazinski, the Public Health Director of the Board of Health, regarding the challenges with the septic system. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Questions for Rebecca or the committee? Mr. Schifrin, any thoughts?
Is there anything more about the septic issues, or that you found in talking to him about?
I'm hoping John can summarize it.
Take the stand. When we spoke with Mr. Brzezinski, we discussed a lot of the issues that we've already discussed in the past with the board on various occasions. Basically, you have a very high water table there, as you're all aware, poor draining soil, basically a failed cesspool system right now. Depending on what was to go into the building would actually determine what kind of system you would have to design. Depending on how big, I mean, there are certain types of properties that it may not work out for at all, you know, like a large restaurant. I can't humanly see that working without someone spending an absolute fortune. So overall, it's just it's not a great scenario for the septic. And that's gonna really, I believe, play a major role in what people are willing to do with this property.
Has there been any, I know that, you know, this came up last annual town meeting. Has there been any interest that we know of from potential buyers in the property?
I am trying to recall when I last walked through the property with Pam, our former EDC person, and it might have been after town meeting, but I believe it was before, and there's been no real bites on it, actually, for
All right.
serious interest.
Okay. Other questions?
Just one.
Ms. Brackey?
Sorry. John, where is the current septic located? So if the septic needs to be replaced, is it under the parking lot?
No, if
It's
you're,
not. So that won't be affected in any way then?
no, right now, if you're looking at the building, it would be to the left, basically off the building, if I had to guesstimate off the top of my head, probably 30 feet near the back of the building towards the kitchen area, if I recall exact location.
So potentially, if the parking lot is able to be used for recreational purposes during the day, then in replacing the septic should not affect that use as long as the buyer's receptive.
As long as they're receptive, and again, the size of the septic would be determined by what the building would be used for, so it could be much, much larger than you normally expect due to the perk problems you're gonna run into.
So there might be some disruption, but probably not a lot then.
Yeah, I'd
Okay.
say that's probably safe.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Shea, anything?
No questions. Thanks, everybody, for the work you did. I think the recommendations are certainly consistent with the discussion from the town meeting last spring. I guess the other question I would have, I don't know if your committee can answer it, is where we stand with the RFP process and when we anticipate that being issued. And certainly would hope that, these recommendations are included in the wording of the RFP.
Absolutely. So the RFP, I think we have the skeleton of the RFP, and obviously the committee has provided a lot of the detail, and Rebecca spoke to the history, which is, what I don't, have a great feel for, but now we can address that within the RFP. And all of these other, the issues, the other 4 issues that were mentioned this evening are things that can be put into the RFP to help us navigate, hopefully, several bidders through the bidders to determine who is most advantageous to us, not simply from a price perspective, but from what they're going to do to the property and how they're going to, maintain the exterior, what, they intend to do for parking, how they intend to address those things. So it's my intention that we should have, that out to bid as soon as possible and hopefully have something back within the next, 30, 45 days.
And the wording of the RFP is such that it gives us that flexibility to award to what we interpret as the best
That
long-term
flexibility
use
is
as
inherent in
opposed
an RFP because you're evaluating on your non-price items, and then you're evaluating based on your price items separately. So you make a determination as to who is the most advantageous bidder based on those non-price items first, and you rank them, and then you look at the pricing. Obviously you hope that the most advantageous non-price has the lowest price, or in this case, the highest price, right? But oftentimes you have to find, a happy medium between the two. So it's not always, there may be somebody who is more advantageous to the town, that's more willing to preserve the property and to either give up a portion of 40 or do something that's advantageous for us for parking, may not pay us more, and you have the right to make that decision to take less money in order to get more of what we want.
And when do you see the town would start to actively market the property?
I'd like to get the RFP out sometime in the next week to 10 days, so we can have that out and begin to market that. Hopefully, John will be doing, many more walkthroughs.
Perfect. My only question is under the 5 key considerations, and again, this is an outstanding work product, so thank you. And very supportive of the work you've done and the work product that you've come up with. When you say that you would like the preferences to be given to potential buyers who accommodate the crest above, evenly weighted. So, help me understand this. So, historic, preserving the historic facade, to you, is the committee saying that is evenly weighted with septic, saying you're being aware that the septic is required?
Well, I thought this might be a bit problematic, but I think it's, that it's important that we have a buyer who is aware, willing, and able to go through the process and take on whatever they find when they start digging into it. I think that should probably be equally weighted in order to avoid a hassle of purchase, a slowdown,
And my only thought on, in the RFP, I don't know if that should be specifically mentioned. I'll be curious to know what the others think. I don't want to turn off a buyer that may have to, say, come to the table evenly weighing the permitting process with historic preservation or parking versus affordable. I don't know. So I don't know if that was a major recommendation of yours or something for us to all consider, but that part threw me.
I think yeah, I understand. I think it came about with recreation. The draft RFP weighted the recreation concerns much lower than everything else. I think 5 points as opposed to 15 points for historical.
I think the five considerations you brought up will form the evaluation criteria, and,
Okay.
you know, they can all be weighted equally. You know, but again, I think you want to balance, you know, so if someone's willing to do the parking and the exterior, you know, are those more important than, so I guess there's got to be some thought given to that, but if your recommendation is that they each be weighted, if we have 5 recommended, they're each weighted 20%.
I mean, in a way, it's common sense, if it's a viable purchaser who can
Right.
actually complete the project. I
Right.
think that's what the purchasing and the septic
Yep.
kind of indicate that, you know.
Right.
But really, historic and recreation, which is
Yep.
why I did a little more detail on those, are the,
Okay. No, that makes sense. I understand what they're looking for.
Okay.
yeah,
All right. Outstanding.
thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Chief Paulus, welcome. Sir, I know you have a resignation, but then that can also turn into an appointment. So we look forward to that.
Set.
No, we've got one more.
I'm just gonna shut it down for now, Mark.
Chief, go ahead.
Very quick tonight.
Yep.
We went over in early November. We hired one of our telecommunications officers, Cam Chapsky, town resident, Algonquin grad, has been with the department for years. Very happy to report he's ready to transition on Monday, January 22nd. He'll be going to the Plymouth Police Academy. So we're just here tonight to say that he wants to resign his position effective that date, and then he'll become a student officer, and then hopefully be out in June, and we can put him on the road, which
Beautiful.
we're looking forward to.
Perfect.
Now that that domino fell, we have his brother, Austin, who we trained as a part-time telecommunications officer. He's been working with us, and he's ready to step right into his role, and happy to report he's going to do that and continue his studies at Worcester State University for his bachelor's degree. Also a town resident, Algonquin grad. Both came through the Student Police Academy, Citizens Police Academy for Austin, so we're happy to have them both. Just looking for your blessing tonight.
You got mine.
Yep.
And-
Second.
Yeah? I mean, this is great. I've been watching Blue Bloods a lot, so this is like, you know, the community service is in their genes, and it's
They
great
might
to
start a
see.
little slower than that.
It's
but-
quite all right. Do we need a
Do we
formal
look
vote?
outside of the
So-
family, or is that?
As long as they got the,
Oh,
you know,
Three separate.
as long as they have the right fit,
Are there
we'll
more
keep taking them.
Chapskys in line, or?
I don't believe so, but.
Okay.
So I'll recommend we do this in 3 separate votes. First, I would move to accept the resignation of Cameron Chapisky as a full-time communications officer effective 1/22/18. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, I would move that we appoint Cameron Chapisky as student officer effective 1/22/18. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. And third, I'd like to recommend we appoint Austin Chapinski as full-time communications officer effective 1/22/18. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Outstanding. Please thank them for their service to our community, and thank you, Chief, for coming tonight.
We will, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please share with Cam our best through the academy.
We will.
All right, Ms. Galligan. So we have a request for aesthetic improvement to Marlborough Road intersection. Please.
So this should be quick too. St. Mark's had approached me a few months back, actually, September, about the intersection down here of St. Mark's Street and 85. The town, back when John Boland was still superintendent, we had changed that intersection around. And one thing that we do find happens, people do still sort of drive through the grass area now. And St. Mark's would like to take on aesthetically improving that. It's going to move the stone wall to keep, to basically make it look more like it's part of the field. The grass it, make sure that there's the crosswalks, there's handicap ramps and accessibility. But basically, we just need to, I would like to see you guys vote to just give them a license to do the work, and then they'll maintain that property. Once the license is done, if you guys authorize someone to sign it, then it can just be signed and we wouldn't have to come back.
Purple?
No,
Any
So,
thoughts?
so if I understand correctly, you're asking the board to authorize town council to draft a license for this purpose, and then to authorize
The chairman
someone
to sign it
the
or
chairman to
something?
sign it on their
Yes, please.
behalf, or someone else to sign on their behalf?
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion about this?
Yeah, so is St. Mark's planning to construct a sidewalk between the edge of the road and the wall as part of this improvement? Do you know?
I don't think so. I think it's just a walking path, but there will be, at the crosswalk, they still have to have a landing area that's wheelchair accessible. But they don't need to continue a sidewalk, they just have to land them.
Should we have a plan of what they plan to do? Is that appropriate, or
Well, that could be, could
just
that be attached to the
authorize them
license?
to do whatever? or-
Yeah, so that plan could be attached to the license, and that could, come back to the board and be distributed to you before it's executed. Does that work?
And I
So
would just-
we're,
Go ahead.
maybe the motion is subject to a review of the plan?
Well, it's council's got to, you're basically at this point directing council to prepare the license, and then to, if you want, you can hold off on the second piece, excuse me, of giving the chair the opportunity to sign it. You want to review it again before it's authorized, so we can, you meet every 2 weeks. So by the time it's prepared, it could come back to the board for approval and signature.
Sure.
So you could just do the first part.
Yeah, I guess in your discussions with them, if for some reason we ever needed to have sidewalks in that area, let's, at least leave enough room so that we don't have to move the wall as part of a town project to make room for sidewalks.
Yes,
So-
and they do plan on having it to be a walkway, or to be walkable, it's just, they weren't planning on sidewalks specifically.
All right, any other questions? All right, we're only doing the first part. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, Ms. Galligan.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have approval of appraisal payments for Main Street Reconstruction Project. Mr. Purple?
Mr. Chairman, Karen, I don't know if you want to handle this piece, or Ms. Galligan has been instrumental in moving this process through, so I think she may be the best one to handle this.
And first is accept donated easements, Ms. Galligan.
Yes, so, our nonprofit, the St. Mark's Faith School Southborough Housing Authority, have all donated the easements that we need for the Main Street project. So I just need the board to, vote to actually accept those donations prior to doing the next step of the process.
I would move that we vote to accept the donated easements. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Next, next is approved donation of town easements.
So there's obviously a lot of town properties right along the Main Street corridor, so we need to actually donate to ourselves
Yes.
those easements.
So I would move that we approve the donation of those town easements. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Third, approve order of taking as prepared by town council. Ms. Galligan.
So we have a set of plans, and then the actual order taking, it's summarized in the packet, but the actual order town council had put together. And that's what we actually have to file at the registry of deeds, which will then give us authority to use those easements.
Agreed. Then I would move that we approve the order of taking as prepared by town council. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And finally, Ms. Galligan requests to authorize the chairman to sign documents related to easements.
Yes, and that's just, as other things come up, to sign the acceptances of the donated easements. We have affidavits that we have to put in that we wrote, that we did all the things we needed to. I just need someone to be able to sign that.
Yes, ma'am. Then I would move that we authorize the chairman to sign documents related to the easements. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Galligan.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, before we move
Yes.
on, we do have Mr. Hegarty here, the town clerk, is here to notarize your signatures on these documents, because the town council will be picking them up in the morning. So if you could take a moment.
So why don't we take a 5-minute recess for us
Just
to
to do
sign
these
the documents? All right, we'll be in recess for 5 minutes. Okay, next we have the golf course committee update. Mr. Pilecki, join us, please. Welcome.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Same to you.
I think you've all seen it in the package. I guess
Just here.
for the benefit of the audience here, can I bring up the package on this?
It's fine.
Or not? Here, let's see here. If I quickly jump over, is the package normally kept on here? Website, right? This works. I come before the board with kind of an interim report of where we are and what we're doing in this time frame since we've started the committee. We've learned a lot and would like to share that with where we are and where we're going over the next 6 months in the scope of what the committee's doing. We have a charter which asks us to collaborate with the Public Safety Committee as they lay out their plans for that part of the golf course, to preserve the golf course, to keep it open during the construction, and then have a viable golf course for the town after the construction is completed. And we have some other duties too in terms of planning the long-term future from a capital perspective, looking at the governance of what shape the management of the golf course should be after the fact, after the town has completed whatever changes there are in that area. Just in terms of where we are in collaboration, we have completed a very viable concept for how the golf course will integrate and be altered with the public safety building. We have parking identified, course access is integrated, and in general, the cooperation of the Public Safety Building Committee has been terrific. Their architect context has also been terrific, working with our golf course architect to make something that works for everybody. We have identified a site for the clubhouse and where it's going to be relocated. We have also identified budgeted and non-budgeted expenses within the bonding authority. We've gone through that through Mr. Purple to understand, and council to understand just what is included and what is not included in the scope of the public safety building construction. We have pretty much finished what we plan to do with the context, the architects, in terms of the location, the sizing, things like turnarounds in the parking lot, and how the parking lot's going to fit in the overall scheme of the footprint of the public safety building. We also are in the process of finalizing RFP language for design documents that relate to the final locations of the first and ninth features of the golf course, the first tee and the ninth green. The golf course architect, together with the committee, is also exploring what a master plan would look like for the golf course going forward from the point after the construction is completed. As many of you know, the conservation restrictions in process, we believe on the committee that the language is written is suitable for going forward with whatever small modifications and maintenance on the course in the future without overly burdening the management company that will be managing the course. Our out game here at the end of our charter is going to leave behind for the next the golf committee golf course master plan, golf course governance plan, that is, how do we run the golf course on a day-to-day basis. And then a model management RFP for the golf course. We learned quite a bit in this RFP phase for the golf management company. as well as a model architect RFP too for any future work that requires a golf course architect. We'll have an outline budget for continuing operations, and we'll also, as part of the master plan, will make round number estimates of capital needs for the golf course. The concept area is a little small, but basically the area that occupies, that's occupied now by the parking lot, clubhouse, the 9th green and the first tee all are consumed by the public safety building. So the entrance is to the left, and it wraps around to a parking lot that is directly behind. I'm sorry for the size. We have larger drawings we can provide. Wraps around the backside of the public safety building, and we are proposing to move the 9th green essentially up the hill above the golf course. So instead of going, essentially going to the left, it's going to go to the right up there. There's an empty area on the course that fits. It's a safe location to put it, and it looks to be of a type of soil and construction that we can actually have a reasonably economic construction of that feature. The first tees will also change location. They'll be moved over near the clubhouse. And that constitutes kind of the minimum architectural changes to the golf course in order to make it viable going forward.
I'm just trying to envision that 9th green. Is there a house? Is that near Lettisquama?
Yeah, we're heading
or
up
no?
towards Lettisquama.
But there's not a, you
No,
know,
if you're looking up the hill, you'll see a large scrub area on the side of the hill between the 8th and 9th fairways where
okay.
there's a couple boulders, a couple large trees, and then a very large scrub area. And that area is going to be the site of a future 9th green
Okay.
up the hill.
All right, thank you.
So it's just to the, I guess, west of where the 8th tee currently is?
Yeah, correct. The 8th tee has to move a little bit aside for safety reasons.
Okay.
People will be hitting up at the green, and we just want to push the 8th tees a little bit away from that, maybe 30 or 40 feet, probably on that order. Assumptions, where we are learning, is I think it's pretty much a known fact that golf course construction is pretty much essentially unfunded. We have some idea that we can move the clubhouse within the scope of the public safety building bond scope, but the foundation, utility services, restoring the steps and decks, having a ramp for ADA compliance is not within the current budget of the public safety building bond. Parking retaining wall, for example, is another thing, a feature that we need because we're going to scalp a little bit of the current plan is to scalp a little bit of that hillside to get enough parking spaces for the golf course. The public safety building cost estimator estimates the value of this work that's within the footprint of the public safety building at about $300K, plus or minus. There's two estimates, one's 270-ish, and the other one's 300K. So it's in that range. These are the essential changes that happen once the golf course gets scraped off that area where the public safety building is going to go. These costs are separate from the costs of the short-term expenses for temporary locations, temporary facilities for clubhouse once it moves, and any other future reconstruction costs of the 1st and 9th fairways. So what do we have for temporary facilities? Once the clubhouse moves, and the clubhouse has to move very early in the process of the public safety building, essentially it has to move almost immediately to scrape the land and start contouring it for the building. So we need to move the operations of the golf course to trailers, and these are readily available for when the clubhouse is unusable. We're proposing 3, perhaps 4 trailers, a clubhouse trailer, essentially an operations trailer, a bathroom trailer to avoid the expense of bringing a temporary septic system in here. This would be, if you've gone to a golf course or any function, typically it's a nice trailer that has potted water in it and is pumped once every couple of weeks. That's a much more direct solution that's less expensive than adding a temporary septic system. And a couple storage trailers. These would be similar to what Eagle Leasing does or something like that, a Connex trailer for equipment and golf carts and such. Safety items, there'll probably be a need for some fencing and signage just to keep people away from the construction area. Other costs, the other category is restoration. We need to have architectural drawings for the new first tee and the ninth green, the restoration essentially. And these then have to go to bid for construction for those two features. That puts the golf course back into an operational state that everybody can live with going forward. That's separate from any future capital plans we might have for the golf course. Okay, costs. Now, I caveat this, the only professional estimate of costs here is the first line, the construction cost that we have from the PSB. We've been fortunate on the committee to have the benefit of some professionals in golf course management give us some ideas about what the costs are for these things. Temporary facilities would run somewhere around $46K. That's assuming 4 trailers, 6 months type of a thing. If it's shorter, then the costs are less, obviously. If it's longer, the costs will be longer. That's really a month-to-month rental of the temporary facilities. The permanent restoration of the first and ninth holes, we estimate at just under $300K. This is based on several conversations we've had with various golf course professionals. There's some good online sources too for other towns that have done this sort of reconstruction work as well. So this would include, there's a new cart path, a set of tees for the first hole, a little bit of fairway work, and the reconstruction of a ninth green and its related features, a bunker. So that's kind of the nut right now that we have to figure out how to get through. Now, other unfunded tasks that I'm making the committee aware of, the board aware of, relate to long-term operations. The course has been subject, and our golf course architect has pointed a lot of this out, has been subject to a kind of a period of benign neglect. Not a lot has been invested from a capital point of view in the golf course for things like irrigation, minor drainage projects, reshaping of and a restoration of some of the features of the course. Just frankly, within the scope of what St. Mark's did with the course and the operation of the course, that's a reasonable endpoint for how much the course generated in terms of revenue and what could be invested in it. So these are a couple of, I wouldn't say red flags, but light pink flags that say there's some other things that need to be done downstream. How does this phase out? Immediately to 12 months, when the shovel hits the dirt for the public safety building, the clubhouse is going to have to move. So when the schedule's set for that, we have to have a plan for where the clubhouse is going to go. We have a location. However, right now we have an unfunded need for the foundation, the utilities that go to that, and any other restoration work for things like decks.
And Mr. Pilecki,
Yes.
if that were funded at town meeting, and maybe Mr. Purple, you could help with this. If it were funded at town meeting, when could that project begin? When do you think it could be completed and full restoration of what the golf course at least used to be in place? Maybe I jumped the phase.
No, you're fine, Mr. Kalenda. I was trying to lay it out here in terms of the separation of what we could actually economically do in the scope of the PSB if we funded these line items. Because you could take advantage of all the machinery, the management, the oversight that's already in place for that, the design work that's been done by Context, and just basically fill those line items with the funding to take advantage and take care of that. And that includes the scope for putting the foundation in and all those things that would get us back running with the clubhouse. Beyond that, the first and ninth features that need to be restored ideally would be started this year at some point in the summer so that sod or seed could be down by August. And that's probably the most ideal case. You need about 6 months for that to set and be in place so that you could use it in the following spring of 19.
Okay.
So that's kind of the scope of that. Now, if you deferred that to the following year, then the same pattern would be, you probably wouldn't want to do that work until you could lay it out for the fall leading into 2020.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, sir.
okay.
All right.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
did.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, so in the first 12 months of the construction, we'd be working out of trailers until the clubhouse moves to its final location, and then we can get rid of the rental trailers and live in the clubhouse, using the temporary green for the 9th and the temporary tees for the 1st, while all this other construction is going on. The current plan also allows everything to kind of interwork so that the work on the PSB can go on while the work on the golf course is happening while the golf course is still open. It's a bit of a dance, but all those three things can happen simultaneously if there's available funding to do that. And that gets you to the end point as fast as possible. Restoration, like I said, if it could be done this year, that would be great. Then you'd have a much more complete course early in 19. If not, then it would fold over another year. That's why I have 6 to 18 months here. And we'd continue operations on the temporary first tee and 9th green until those features of the course were functional. And then onward from that, and there's a fairly long list of things that need to be done to repair and restore some of the other parts of the golf course, really to preserve it. We know that there's an issue with funding here, so we're not trying to turn this into Pebble Beach or anything like that. We're basically trying to preserve the golf course and move it forward as an asset to the town with the minimum expense that we can manage. So these things could be phased. Irrigation could be done 1 year, repairs to fence lines, things like that another year. And that's part of the capital plan we'd like to present at the end of our term here as the committee. Some sensible things that could be done here. I think that's it. We have a couple other things that we would like to propose. One, we'd like to certainly try and achieve Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary status for the golf course in keeping with the conservation restriction. I think this is a very nice match. It also secures assistance from the Audubon International in terms of managing the course as well to keep it in its natural state, minimum pesticides, minimum impact on the environment as well. So I think that really also is kind of a longer term goal, but we're mindful of that in our planning for what features the golf course needs in its master plan to try and make sure that we have a golf course that's environmentally sensitive and preserved for the future.
Any idea, Mr. Pilecki, if there might be grants associated with that kind of certification?
Yes. The grants are, maybe Andre Fortner, are you still in here?
Yes.
Do you know if Audubon has grants?
Well, I know that,
Andre, could you use a microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Andre Fortin. I don't know specifically if Audubon International has grants to provide funding for a project like this. That I don't know, but certainly Audubon International is a nonprofit, and they themselves are funded by membership grants from other nonprofits, and also primarily by the USGA. And really, they're in the business of environmental stewardship, and they are really a top-notch educational resource for exactly the kind of thing that we're entering in. It's primarily golf courses. There's over 800 golf courses in the U.S. that are covered by this program, but there's over 3,000 properties, including what I found out, small communities, or parts of communities are involved in this sanctuary program. Also ski resorts like Stowe. So it's really businesses that have pieces of land that they want to, that are covered by conservation restriction, and they want this additional sanctuary certification from this type of nonprofit. But really, what's really key, I think, is because we don't really have a lot of knowledge ourselves. We're not experts in the conservation business in terms of managing land. And this is the best kind of resource that we can tap into in order to get that knowledge. And since we're going to have to be doing that anyway, learning how to deal with managing a golf course under a conservation restriction, we're going to be taking steps anyway that fall into this kind of program. So working together with an outfit like that and tapping into the vast resources that they have for that kind of knowledge is really something that really should strive to achieve. And I've also learned from the chairman of CPC and CPA that they're very open to the idea, and there's also funding that's been approved in order to get the certification process going. They themselves certified, the Audubon people are willing to help us in filling out the questionnaire and going forward. Since we're going to be doing it anyway, it'd be great to get involved in a program like that. It'd really be a stamp, put a real environmental stamp on the golf course and the town of Southborough itself. And it also opens the door for advertising, positive message. It really would put us on the map.
And did you mention, sir, that other golf courses in Massachusetts have this certification?
I didn't say Massachusetts particularly, but that's a good question. I do know the answer. There's about 15 courses in Massachusetts that are covered. Among them, courses that we're familiar with, like the TPC in Boston is covered.
Might be something nice to highlight at town meeting for the public to hear and know that beautiful courses like that.
Right. Nashada Country Club in Concord Country Club, Widow's Walk in Scituate, which is a public course. That's almost a model. You hear about environmental courses, that comes up as a name. That's covered under that program. And there's another number of other courses. There was ones in the Hingham, and I don't know all the names by heart, but I know that those kind of jumped out at me.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
To your point, sir, the second recommendation is to establish essentially a Friends of the Golf Course nonprofit organization that can access things like grants from the PGA, the USGA. There's also programs from the United States Department of Agriculture for recreational facilities for towns the size of Southborough that can either be granted to nonprofits or the town itself, depending on the program it's in. And it points specifically at recreational facilities.
Okay.
So there's some opportunities there. And again, that's part of what we're trying to do is develop a long-range plan for what stewardship the golf course will have after we're done.
Okay. Excellent.
And that is the end of the
All right.
presentation.
Questions for Mr. Pilecki? Mr. Shea?
Sure. So again, thanks to you and your committee for all the hard work, and very glad to see the collaborative effort that has gone on between your group and the Public
been
Safety
terrific.
Building Committee as well. I know that's something that Planning Board asked at their last hearing discussing the permitting that's required for the Public Safety Building was, what's the plan for the golf course? And I would encourage them to review this, if they're not watching live now, to review the recording of this, just to see how much coordination effort has gone on behind the scenes to ensure that golf starts up. And I know that we have the warrant open for the annual town meeting currently. I just think that we need to continue with this and not delay. I think that we need to make sure that this board sponsors the articles for the funding necessary for at least the first 12-month recommendations as outlined tonight for modifications to the first tee, ninth green, to at least get that in place. I'm not ready to undertake an irrigation system throughout the whole course yet, but I think that we just need to send them the clear message that all systems go with this, and we can't afford delays in the
Thank you.
course.
Well said, Mr. Shea. Ms. Bracchio?
Thank you. I second what Mr. Shea has said. I do have a couple questions, though. On the initial 300,000, is any of that fundable through CPC? I would imagine moving the building isn't, but some of the other work that's included in that,
I can't answer that, but I could speculate that it's in the footprint of the design area of the public safety
okay,
building. So I'm not sure if it was on the golf course side,
Right.
perhaps, yes.
okay. The only concern I really had was with having 4 trailers and the sensitivity to the neighborhood and I understand the golf course has to stay open, I get that. Has there been any discussion, I know you have a representative from the neighborhood, Mr. Battles, on your committee, has there been any discussion with any of the neighbors? I mean, I would hate to suddenly have, with the public safety going on, and then have 4 big trailers show up for storage and everything, so if you could just speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Kevin Battles, 11 Lattisquama. This plan just came about probably a couple weeks ago. So, although I'm probably one of the more impacted residents, and I think that I would prefer that this is the way for us to get the course back to shape. And if we have to deal with, a 6-month period with trailers to do that, then I certainly would be okay with that. I do agree that it probably makes sense to, perhaps at our next meeting, invite some of the residents, if this is the path that we're going to go down, to have them
Yeah,
get an
just
understanding.
start a conversation, just so somebody doesn't say, at some point when, if, things are moving along smoothly, and then a little bump in the road that we could have potentially avoided, so.
The trailer location that's identified, and this has to do with temporary access to the golf course, is actually going to be, let's see here if I can point it out, maybe here. Be helpful. It's much closer to 85 than it is to Lattisquama.
It is, okay.
The area here that's, it's a little hard here. This is an area that's designated for catch basins from all the asphalt surfaces
Yep.
here. I think we've talked about it before. The trailers are going to be over here because this is going to be the temporary access and parking. They're not going to dig these
So
holes.
it won't be in the back.
It won't be in the
Okay.
back. It's going to be almost on the first fairway.
Okay, that's fine, that was my concern, I wasn't sure where the exact placement was,
No,
as
no,
far as.
the area on the other side where the maintenance building is on Lattisquama would not be appropriate. There's no parking there or anything like that, so.
Okay. And one last, just quick question, on the 300,000, is there some type of breakout of,
Yes, the committee has a line-by-line estimate. The Public Safety Building Committee has a line-by-line
they do,
estimate of
okay,
that.
then I'll get it from there.
And the other numbers that I've also posted there have line-by-line estimates from our conversations with golf professionals, and I can provide that to the board, that's fine.
Wonderful, perfect, thank you.
Mr. Schifrin?
Thank you. So I think my biggest concern is this construction period.
Yep.
So are you comfortable with the plan in terms of golfers, like parking and access and operations of the course during construction, that it won't be interrupted, that,
The only period, sir, I see that could be problematic is the point where the septic system for the public safety building goes in, because that occupies a very large chunk of the golf course, so there's going to have to be some temporary routing around that. After it's covered over, it's fine. And that, I understand from that committee, that happens relatively early in the process. That they're going to dig the septic field for that, to really just get it out of the way of the golf course. There's still some coordination in terms of the actual network planning of how that works. The other thing about having the trailers down by 85 is they're really far away from all the construction. So I think we can stay out of the way of any heavy equipment that's moving around there.
is there any chance that one of the first things that can happen there is the relocation of the clubhouse to kind of avoid this trailer time?
Yeah, so one of the things that the Public Safety Committee, and again, I think the Public Safety Architect has enjoyed working with your person, is trying to coordinate, obviously the building, Mr. Pilecki is correct, the clubhouse needs to be moved fairly early in the process. I think the intention is to try and have everything lined up and the funding lined up so that the foundation can be ready when that clubhouse needs to be moved. So, because I just did a quick count on my fingers of 6 months of trailers. there is really no reason we should need 6 months of trailers, because that's essentially the entire first season.
Right.
So, you know, hopefully that coordinated effort, I think the understanding in my conversations with Mr. Harrison for the management company is that they will start the season in the clubhouse, okay? And we're gonna work with the building committee, the owner's project manager, and whoever the contractor is, the GC that comes in for this, and try to find out the best coordinated fashion so that that foundation can be ready, and we can be ready to move, we're ready to move that clubhouse, we move it once, and we put it exactly where it's supposed to be. But I really don't think it's gonna be that we're gonna need to rent a trailer for 6 months in order to facilitate a temporary clubhouse.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, please.
Is the clubhouse tying into the new septic that's going in?
Yes, yes,
So
that's been settled.
we have to, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, to try to move the clubhouse after the septic's done to,
Well, the clubhouse may move in advance of the septic system, and there's just gonna have to be a cesspool, a collection point that's
Okay.
pumped.
okay,
It's temporary
Yeah,
facility.
that new septic system, the septic system is going to be the septic for the school,
Yep.
public safety, and the clubhouse.
clubhouse, okay,
There
thank
is
you.
enough, there is enough capacity to handle all three of those uses.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Pilecki, so I understand there will be a warrant, this upcoming town meeting for the clubhouse. Will there, you mentioned a master plan, do you know when that could be completed? I'm guessing not before April.
Yeah, we could do that before April.
You could, that would be amazing, because if that could be part of what is, presented to town meeting so that they can see a long-term picture, I think that would be beneficial. As Mr. Shea said, irrigation, while maybe not an immediate need, could very well be a short-term, need. And I think the public needs to have that understanding of what could be coming down the road for maybe the following town meeting, if there's another warrant article, for things like that. I would hate to see the course come into some disrepair and start to lose people, and then suddenly what was, I believe, a very small profit to St. Mark's, when the town takes it over, if things were to deteriorate and suddenly we're running a deficit, and that's gonna be a problem. I think with irrigation, the beauty of the course is gonna attract people, more and more people. So anyway, hopefully that'll be part of the
Great.
The plan. I don't have any other questions from Mr. Pilecki. I don't know if anyone else does. I do want to move up one item, though, on our agenda, because you may have some input on it, and that's the approval of the golf management contract for St. Mark's Golf Club, as provided in our packet. I would move that we approve that. I understand that town council has reviewed it, and it's in good shape. For discussion, is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion on the contract? Okay, none here either. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Great,
Thank you, Mr. Pilecki. Okay, moves us to the chairman's report. I just have 2 items. The town is in receipt of 3 OML complaints, which have been included in the packet. These were circulated to board members and then passed on to town council for response on behalf of the board. I move that these complaints be referred to town council for his response on behalf of the board to the respective complainants and to the Attorney General's office.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And then secondly, I did have the wonderful opportunity to be at St. Anne's this past Sunday for Devin McCarthy, young man in our town, for his Eagle Scout ceremony. This is the 3rd in just the last month of Southborough scouts who have become Eagle Scouts, which is an incredible accomplishment. Less than 2% of all scouts ever attain the rank of Eagle Scout. And to have 3 in such a small period of time for the town of Southborough is amazing. In fact, his older brother, Russell, is also an Eagle Scout. And Devin, I tell you, I've had the pleasure of meeting him a number of times. He is an incredibly impressive young man. He's already a leader in our community. For his Eagle Scout project, anyone who drives up and down 85 past or to our senior center has noticed there's a new flag that's beautifully lit up at night and a sign there for our senior center, and he wanted to do that for our town. That was his project. He did everything to help coordinate, the purchase of items that would be needed, the installation of that flag, the lighting of it. We had a wonderful ceremony that he invited many members of the community, as well as our veterans, to come for that ceremony. And anyway, I just wanted to share how proud I was to be at Devon's Eagle Scout ceremony and celebrating his accomplishments. So, well done, Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Purple. anything
Mr.
from you?
Chairman, just quickly, I wanted to let the board know that the finance director and I continue to work the FY19 budget. We've been focusing a lot on the capital. We are beginning to get into the operational pieces of it. We did have a brief discussion with advisory last night and kind of give them an idea of what we're looking to do. It's our intention to be back before this board and invite advisory to the meeting as well to talk about the path forward as to how we see us getting down to numbers that we feel would be acceptable to this board and as well as town meeting. Advisory has come back with a request that we come back with two scenarios. One, a 4.5% tax increase, and also a 3.5% tax increase. If you'd like to see something different, now is the time. Or if you want to send something, following the meeting to either myself or Mr. Ballantyne, we can take a look at those things and make sure we bring that forward. I think the one item that we have heard from advisory and that we've gotten from this board is there seems to be general support for adding the third police officer as requested by the chief when he began this process 3 years ago. So whatever we bring forward at the 4.5 or the 3.5 is going to include that item. So if there are other must-haves, please, feel free to reach out and let me know. I want to make sure what we bring forward is going to have in there what you're looking for.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Purple. On the consent agenda, I will, I'll just read them off. Does anyone want any particular one held? No. So the first, and I'll vote that we move to approve items 1 through 5. One is approved meeting minutes, January 2nd, 2018. Second is accept a donation of $500 from Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare toward the Fay Memorial Playground. Third, accept a donation totaling $2,800 for Southborough Youth and Family Services. 4, accept a donation of $25 for Southborough Library. And 5, appoint Michael Santuososo as maintenance technician for the facilities department. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just real quick on item number 5, I just wanted to thank Mrs. Hale as well as Mr. Parent for their assistance, and Mr. Ballantyne helped participate in the process as well. Looking forward to having Mr. Santosuso start and fill that void in facilities.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Okay, so in our packets, we have, next is we'll talk about the, a naming committee for the golf course property. And I do think it's important that Ms. Faniff is here. I would love to have a full board discussion on this, but at least we can start having some preliminary discussions. Mr. Purple, do you want to lead us off?
I'm just looking for the policy. Yeah, so at the last meeting, there was a discussion, or there's been a discussion, or it's at least been mentioned to the board about whether or not the town wishes to keep the name of St. Mark's Golf Club now that the town is the owner of the property. We have had some discussions with Mr. Harrison of New England Golf, who you've now approved this evening is going to be in charge of managing the course. For those that may not know, he's been managing the course for St. Mark's for a number of years, so meet the new boss, same as the old boss. But he suggested that, if we are looking at a name change, this is, the time to think about that. The board did accept a naming policy, which I have included in your packets. It was done this past June. It's modeled after the naming policy that the school department has used very successfully. Mr. Kalanda could probably speak to that as a school committee member. because I know that it's been used on several occasions, just recently at Algonquin. So if the board is interested in, changing the name and kind of making it our own, there's obviously a process. The board would appoint a committee inclusive of town staff, administration, community members, and at least one selectman. The town staff, board committee members, residents may submit nominations or name suggestions to the committee. Nominations are presented in a brief statement containing any biographical, historical data, and reasons for offering up that as a suggestion. The committee then submits as many as 3 names to the town administrator, and then those are brought forward to the Board of Selectmen for consideration, and, obviously the name change, the name choice would be yours. There are no specific numbers for this. This kind of gives you some latitude. It does talk about, the groups or the types of people, residents, administration, one selectman, to be involved in this. So you may want to give that some thought. It is a historic course. Do you want to, involve someone with that, from that aspect? Who on this board would like to sit on it? Are there particular employees, board committee members that you think would be valuable to the process? Or, would you like to open it up and see, and see what comes in from for putting out an advertisement to participate in the committee? So, not expecting a decision from the board tonight, but as the chairman has stated, he'd like to wait for a full board and for Mrs. Fannis' participation in this. But any thoughts or suggestions that you have, if you want to offer them now, that's fine. If you want to submit them, between now and the next meeting, this could be something that could be taken up on a subsequent agenda.
Any initial thoughts?
No, I think we should explore the name change, and I just, I agree there should be a full board, but at the same time, I'd like to see us get going with it sooner rather than later. I think that the management company would prefer to start marketing, probably yesterday, so.
No, I agree, yeah, and I think hopefully at our next meeting, we'll have input, as well as input from Mrs. Faniff, and then hopefully we'll have a good, robust discussion at our next meeting. I did see on Mr. Pilecki's presentation, it said Southborough Golf Club, and that was maybe that has a nice ring to it, but we'll see what people think. All right, thank you, sir. Public comment? All right, seeing none, we are going to go into recess because we are going to reconvene to the Senior Center at 9 Corderville Road, rooms Alpha and Bravo, for a joint meeting with the Conservation Commission. All right, we are in recess.